Go for it. I'd like to call to order the Planning and Zoning Commission meeting of March 1st, 2011. I'd like to state that there is a quorum present for item 1. Item 2 is approval of the minutes of the February 15th, 2011 meeting. Do we have any changes to those meetings from the commissioners?
Motion to approve the minutes as presented.
Motion presented by Jim.
Second.
Seconded by Bill. All those in favor?
Aye.
All those opposed? Minutes of the February 15th meeting are approved. Item 3, consent agenda plats. Item 3A, final plat of Raising Cane Addition, a 1.501 acre tract zoned local commercial located on the south side of Main Street, approximately 300 feet west of Manco Road. Staff?
Good evening, Commissioners. This is a consent agenda plat. There are no variances requested. It does comply with all the zoning and general development ordinance requirements. The proposed is for a new restaurant, Raising Canes, and staff would recommend approval.
Do the commissioners have any questions in reference to this plat? If not, I'd like to entertain a motion of item 3A.
So moved.
Moved by Bill.
Second.
Second by Alvin. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. All those opposed? Motion, item number 3A carries. Public hearing consent agenda plats, item 4. Item 4A, this is a continuation of something we've looked at before, and it's the final plat of the Metro Auto Auction Dallas Edition, Lot 1, Block A 30.64 acre tract zoned light industrial located on the south side of Midway Road between Barkneck Road and Hawfields Prairie Road. Staff, do we have anything before we open up?
No, sir. Only if you have any questions. This is a continued item, and staff does recommend approval. And
at this time, we'll entertain a motion to open up the public hearing, or we'll actually open up the public hearing. So if there's anyone here to speak on this item, item number 3A, please come forward. I'm sorry, item 4A. Could you please state your name and address, and we probably have a sheet there to sign in?
Certainly. I'm Vaughn Bucher with G&A Consultants. We're the engineers on the project. Real simple. We're just combining all the properties into one lot, and I'll be glad to answer any questions.
Okay. Thank you, Vaughn. Are there any questions on this? Do we have a motion to close the public hearing?
Move to close. Second.
Motion by T.J. and seconded by Jim. All those in favor?
Aye.
All those opposed? Public hearing for item 4A is closed. Do we have a motion to, or is there any questions on this particular item again, now that we have a representative here to answer any questions? If not, do we have a motion to approve and recommend item 4A?
So moved.
Recommend or motion by Bill?
Second.
Seconded by TJ. All those in favor?
Aye.
All those opposed? Item 4A is carried as is. Item 5, public hearing plats. Item 5A, final plat of Castle Hills Phase 6, Section A 19.34 acre tract with 134 residential lots and 5 common area lots, designated townhome TH-2 located on the northeast corner of Essex Boulevard and Windhaven Parkway. Staff?
Good evening. As mentioned, this is a replat of a section of Castle Hills. This property was platted a few years ago. The original developer, Portrait Homes, pulled out of the project, and it's been vacant ever since. A new home builder has purchased the property that's within Castle Hills, and a couple of years ago was replatted into from townhouse attached lots to a lots suitable for a detached product. And just recently, the home builder determined that a handful of the lots needed to be adjusted by just a couple of feet in order to fit their product. So the entire purpose of this replat is to simply adjust a few of the internal lot lines to make some adjustments to some lots in the neighborhood of a foot or less so they can fit their home product on all the lots. Because it is a replat, and because there were variances that were approved with the original plat, and then also with the previous replat, we're required to bring those variances back to you for consideration. So all the variances that are on the table this evening are all variances that have been previously approved with either the original plat or the previous replat, and we're simply, they're back on the table again for consideration, but they're the exact same variances. And again, this particular replat is just adjusting a handful of internal lot lines by just a foot or so. So staff is recommending approval of all of these variances given the fact that there's no substantial changes to this property being proposed, and all the variances have already been considered previously. I can go over any of the variances if you'd like me to in detail, if you'd like.
Which of the, I'm looking here, 7 variances, which one specifically addresses the adjustment of a foot or two that's the new variance?
Okay, none of the variances are new. All of the variances, all 7 variances have been previously approved with previous plats or replats. It's just that because this is a brand new plat, technically, we do have to bring the variances back to you and ultimately to the council.
So which of the 7 variances is the one that triggered the renewed look?
None of the variances actually did. What happened was the whole purpose of the replat is once the home builder finished design of their home product and all the different floor plans that they have, they realized that about 5 or 6 of the lots down toward the west end of the subdivision were just a foot or two off and weren't going to be able to fit their standard floor plans.
Okay.
So, you know, they're just making some minor adjustments to a half a dozen or so lots down toward the west end of the subdivision. But the boundary of the subdivision is the same, the number of lots is the same, the street layout is the same, all the variances are the same.
Thank you.
Any other questions? So just to reiterate and be specific, so this particular plat is only to handle the foot or two difference, period, just for this segment of property.
Correct.
Okay.
And because of a technicality, the variances are on the table again to be reconsidered, but staff is recommending approval of them because there's really nothing different between this plat and the previous plat other than a few internal lot lines being shifted.
Okay. We'd like to, are there any other questions, Commissioners? In that this is a public hearing, we'd like to open it up to the public. If there's anyone who would like to speak in reference to this specific request, please come forward at this time.
Motion to close public hearing?
Motion to close public hearing presented by Jim.
Second.
Second by Alvin. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Are those opposed? Okay, the public hearing is closed on item 5A. Do we have any other questions of staff before we move on or entertain a motion to recommend item 5A as presented?
So move.
Motion by Bill,
Second.
Second by TJ. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All those opposed? Item 5A carries as presented. Item 5B, preliminary plat of Kings Grant Edition, an 18.36-acre tract with 85 residential lots for drainage right-of-ways and sanitary sewage right-of-way and water lines right-of-way, zoned Townhouse 2, TH-2, located at the southwest corner of Lake Ridge Road and Marina Vista Drive. Staff?
Hello again. This is a preliminary plat of the Kings Grant Edition. It was formerly platted as Hidden Lakes Townhomes, and the previous developer did not develop the property, so it's been vacant ever since it was originally platted. The property has since been purchased by a new home builder, and they wish to build single-family detached homes. So their intentions are to ultimately abandon the existing final plat and then come back with a new final plat after this preliminary plat has been approved to make it a final plat for single-family attached, or detached, I'm sorry, single-family detached homes. Obviously, with the single-family detached homes, there's roughly half the number of units as there were in the previous, or in the existing plat. The street layout in this plat is very similar to that that was in the existing plat for the townhomes. So the developers are attempting to keep the property designed in a very similar type fashion, except the larger lots. Also with the existing plat, well, with this plat there is a variance to not install rear access alleys for the single-family lots. So we'll be considering that as well with the preliminary plat this evening. The existing plat also had a variance for some of the lots, not all of the lots, but some of the lots to allow front access. With this plat, all of the lots are proposing to be front access. So it's a little different, but this variance obviously was granted previously for the townhouse plat because of topography, especially along the perimeter. This lot, or this property, has quite a bit of slope across it, and so that's the reason the variance was granted the first time. And then now, of course, in addition to the topography issues, trying to develop the property with half as many lots, there's a little bit of a financial factor as well with regard to the development here. So staff is recommending approval. This variance has been granted for other similar type developments in recent years.
Excellent. Commissioners, are there any questions on this one?
The utilities would be in front?
Yes, all the utilities are in the street right-of-way, and then there are a couple of utility and drainage right-of-ways that are exclusive of the actual private lots. So everything will be in either, but it'll all be in public right-of-way.
Okay, so this is specific, and this has nothing to do with the rear alleys being installed or not. That was previously approved then, correct?
Well, it's a new variance because in this case, it's a new plat again, so it has to be reconsidered. And in addition, the previous plat had a variance to only have front access around the perimeter of the property, but the lots toward the center of the property all had alleys. In this case, none of the lots will have alleys, so it is a little bit different. For instance, Chase Oaks, the subdivision that used to be Villas at Wellington, that variance was just granted for that subdivision as well. It was one that went from townhouse to a single-family detached. So, with the economy of going from something that has a lot of units to a lot fewer units, and of course trying to accommodate the larger lot sizes, it's even more difficult to fit the alleys in on top of the topography issues that are already going on here. So,
okay. Good. Any other questions of staff? This time we'd like to open up the public hearing for anyone who would like to speak in reference to item 5B. Please state your name and address, please.
Good evening. My name is Tom June. I'm with JBI Partners. My address is 2900 Amesbury Drive in Plano. We are the engineers on the project, and we'd be happy to answer any questions. I also have representatives from Ryland Home here also, if there are any questions for them. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for being here. Is there anyone else to speak in reference to item 5B? Do you have any questions for the developer?
Glad to see us move into a lower density on this.
Here, I agree.
Motion to close the public hearing.
Motion to close the public hearing presented by Jim.
Second.
Seconded by Alvin. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed. Okay, item 5B, once again, if there are any other questions that we have, Chair will entertain the motion recommendation to go to City Council.
Move to approve.
Motion by TJ.
Second.
And seconded by Bill for item 5B. Are there any other questions, any other discussion at all? Okay, we might as well put this to a motion on item 5B. All those in favor of the motion, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. All those opposed? Item number 5A carries as presented. Item number 6, which is public hearing zoning, in consideration of a zone change request from agricultural open space, AO, district zoning to single-family residential, R18, district zoning on a 1.612-acre tract located at the northeast corner of Valley Parkway and Corporate Drive, further identified as Track 14 of the VR Sutton Survey Abstract 1152. The request is being made by Denton County Church of Christ and property owner, case number PZ-2011-02-02. Staff.
Good evening, Commissioners. The subject property is located on the northeast corner of Valley Parkway and Corporate Drive. It is currently a vacant piece of land. As you can see on the map here, it is surrounded by other agricultural open space zonings. To the north, we have some other R18s, also to the east. Across Valley Parkway to the west, we have some R75. And we have Memorial Park down here and some other ag open property over here. The property in question is zoned ag open, and as such requires 100-foot setbacks in every direction. Churches are allowed in any zoning category, so this church could actually be constructed in the current zoning category. Why the change to R18? Simply put, it's for some of the setback requirements. Whereas the ag open requires the 100-foot setbacks in every direction, the R18 allows a little bit more flexibility. The R18 designation requires a 35-foot front and rear setbacks and side yards that are equal to at least 10% of the lot width, with a minimum 25-foot setback. So you see they gain about 65 feet in every direction, essentially, to accommodate or situate their building a little bit better on the site. In addition, the R18 zoning, if the church for some reason decided not to build at this site, the R18 zoning would guarantee that it blends in with the community, with the other residential property on that block or in that area. R18 essentially means that you would have to have a minimum 18,000 square foot lot and a minimum house size of 2,400 square feet in order to build in that category. With regard to, we did get several phone calls regarding this property. We did get one email earlier today, which I'll just kind of read it to you, if you don't mind. This is from Becky Boza. Oh, Freeman? Sorry. Sorry. I'm against any additional concrete added to this property, as it will add to the flooding problem that we have. I had 3 to 4 feet of water inside my home during the September 8th flood, and am saying no to the zoning change. I lost everything on the first floor, and I'm still in the process of rebuilding. I can't believe that the city would even consider a zoning change. With regard to this, we do have the city engineer available to answer any questions. Again, this is to look at the highest and best use for the property. The zoning, regardless of whether it's granted or not, that type of use is allowed. The next process would be for a plat and site plan to occur in order to develop this property. And it's at that time that essentially a lot of these items are addressed in terms of drainage, parking, and those types of issues. Do you have any questions?
I don't know if now's the time to ask the question or not, but ideally, next is they're going to plat this particular property. What type of parking are we anticipating that a church would need, and would this lot support that, or are they going to be coming with variances for that?
Well, the property is 1.6 acres, so I believe they're looking at a church with about 150 people. Typically, it's 3, sorry? Yeah, 1 per 3 seats.
1 per 3? So you're
Right.
talking 50 parking spots?
50 parking spots, which this site should amply provide enough parking.
Okay. That'd be my only concern, because there's some open parks and open street spaces that could be parked along. Hopefully the church has that problem of people spilling over and they have to build and buy more land.
Yeah.
But we should have, at least according to city staff, we should have adequate parking for a church of 150.
Right. When we go through the site plan process, we'll identify, how big their sanctuary is, how many seats, and they would have to provide their parking, on site. So those items would be addressed through the site plan process.
Great, thank you.
Okay.
And at that point, we will still review that particular plat, or in case there are any variances or any questions we have at that time.
Right. Well, the plat will come to P&Z, like every plat
Right.
does.
Okay.
If there's variances like to parking or site-related, typically that's addressed at the council level.
But specifically, what we're looking at is the rezoning of this particular plat.
Yes, sir.
Item 6A. So,
Yep.
so,
The zoning of this property.
are there any other questions of staff?
Thank you.
Good. At this time, we'd like to open up the public hearing on item number 6A. If there's anyone from the public or in the audience who would like to come forward, please state your name and address.
Good evening. My name is Donna Hobden, and I live in Timber Creek Acres, directly behind this piece of property on the north side of Timber Creek.
Okay.
I am one of the residents who live right along the creek. I had 7 of my neighbors flood in the September the 8th flood. Becky was one of them. She was the furthest one in. And as a group, and I apologize that they're not here to represent this, personally, I kind of dropped the ball on it because I've been dealing with my parents' illness. My mom's been in the hospital for the past week. So I'm just here to say that we are opposed to this because of the flash flooding that it would further incur. I mean, we're already so susceptible to flash flooding. All of those homes were completely underwater, and the people have just moved back into them at the last of December and in January. So if this were approved, and while I'm not at all opposed to having a church in our neighborhood, I would welcome it in a heartbeat. That particular lot has an additional agricultural lot on one side and one on the other. If they were to grow, then they're going to want to purchase those lands that have been also for sale for some time, and further concrete and further drainage issues.
Thank you. Thank you for your
Do I put my
comment.
name on this list here?
Do you have a name?
Do we have anybody from staff that can speak to the drainage in that area?
Yes.
Just my recollection is that it actually kind of slopes down the street, further down Corporate, so it doesn't actually slope into Timber Creek. It actually kind of rises as it heads towards Timber Creek.
David Salmon's here, and he'll be able to address these questions related to runoff.
That'd be great.
That's a real difficult to hear.
Would you prefer that I address those issues now or wait until after, in case there's any other people that want to?
Well, I just didn't want to interrupt anybody else who potentially wants to come forward, is in that we haven't closed the public hearing yet. Is there anybody who would like to speak about this in reference to item 6A? Please come forward, and then we'll look for staff for some engineering information. Please state your name and address.
My name is Neil Ferguson. I live at 1097 Holly Lane in Louisville. I've lived there for over 20 years. It is in not a half mile due south of this property. Good evening, gentlemen. First of all, let me thank you for your service to the Louisville community. About this time in 2007, there were discussions about zoning this land into office space, possibly with a dentist office, and there was even some discussion of having a C-store there. That idea eventually died, partly out of concern for neighborhood compatibility, and I can tell you the neighborhood was sighed a collective sigh of relief. Going back actually not long before that, in the October-January timeframe, 06-07, townhouse development was proposed by L&R. I think it was 76 units on the Cotter-Tomkovich property, and ultimately that also died. The concerns being neighborhood compatibility first, but also potential for traffic and parking issues, as well as watershed rain runoff. And again, the neighborhood sighed a collective sigh of relief. With the information that began to emerge last year about church purchase of this property, I think the general consensus was that perhaps we would finally get something that was more acceptable on this land, but it doesn't come without concerns. And so I'd say in some ways the neighborhood reaction is positive, but it's not entirely so. The bigger problems that we see, first of all, are parking. That any church is likely to conduct special events such as weddings or special gatherings, and where does the overflow parking go? And the obvious answer is it goes catty-corner across the street into Memorial Park. But Memorial Park has its own limited amount of parking, and it's there to support the people who attend that park and make use of its facilities. And I can tell you, since I am literally an eyeshot of Memorial Park, that parking is often very well used almost every day. So parking is certainly a concern, and while we haven't seen a plat for this yet, I wanted to go on record, even at this early time, and say that it needs to be something that is closely scrutinized. I think also that drainage needs to be closely scrutinized because, ironically, hand in hand with the parking issue, with parking, you're essentially asking to make sure that there's more than adequate parking, but as soon as you start putting in parking lots, then you create more of a drainage problem. So it's kind of they're at cross purposes with each other, and I don't know the answer to that, but I do know that both of those issues are going to be a concern, and so I will stand with the Timber Creek neighbors and say that the drainage also concerns me. Otherwise, the simple notion that it's a church, I think, like I say, general neighborhood reaction was actually positive to that. It's when you look into some of the ancillary issues that we start to have some grief. So I'd ask you to keep those thoughts in mind and when we proceed to plat with this if the zoning change is approved. I was going to ask David, too, if by any chance he has, and I don't know if you have this with you, but has a contour map that we could look at and get an idea of how this property lays. And that's all I have. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Perdue. Is there anyone else who would like to speak, come forward and speak on item 6A? Do we have a motion to close the public hearing?
Motion to close public hearing.
Motion by Jim.
Second.
Seconded by T.J. Gilmore. All those in favor of closing, please say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed? Public hearing is closed. Can we please address the drainage and some of the concerns that have been brought forth by the citizens, please?
Okay. Just very quickly with regard to the parking, again, if and when a church comes in to plat the property and also prepare a site plan, they will have to comply with the minimum number of parking spaces that are required in our ordinance. Just like any other development, they have to comply with that number of parking spaces, and we can't require them to have more than what's the minimum required, although a lot of businesses, including churches, sometimes do put more parking in than what's required. It's just that we can't require them to do that because there's a minimum in our ordinance, or max minimum in our ordinance that they have to comply with. But staff will be looking at the parking specifically during that platting and site planning to make sure that they're going to meet the minimums. And of course, if they choose or decide that they don't want to for whatever reason, it is a variance that does have to be scrutinized by the City Council. With regard to the drainage, I mean, there certainly was a terrible flooding event that occurred in this neighborhood back in September. In fact, I was out there the day of the flooding and took probably 50 photos and witnessed the water, several feet up into the homes that back up to the creek. And it was very, very, a very dramatic thing to see. Development of any property, of course, does increase runoff. I mean, as a general statement, although the science of drainage isn't quite as cut and dried as one might seem to think. A lot of times the amount of drainage and whether or not a piece of property becomes flooded depends on where the development is in relation to the property that floods, and a comparison of how much water is coming off of that property versus other properties in the area, and in addition to that, where that water is coming from. In this particular case, I did some real rough calculations with regard to this particular property. It's just over 1.5 acres, and our ordinances will require that there be some minimal amount of landscaping. So we have to assume that there are going to be some areas that are grassed and landscaped and have some trees. But just to be on the conservative side, I took a look at this piece of property assuming that it was building in concrete from property line to property line. The increase in drainage runoff would be roughly 10 cubic feet per second if this piece of property were fully developed and concreted from edge to edge. If it were undeveloped, there would be roughly 4 cubic feet of water per second coming off of this property. In a fully developed state, there would be roughly 14 cubic feet of water per second coming off this property at the peak flow. When you look at the flow rate of Timber Creek, which is immediately behind this property, the 100-year peak flow rate is 12,200 cubic feet per second. So even under fully developed conditions of this property, you would be adding 10 cubic feet of water to an already existing 12,200 cubic feet of water. So, although there is an increase in runoff, when you're looking at the big picture and the entire flood basin for Timber Creek, you're looking at an increase in runoff of less than 1/10%. Now, the other factor that comes into this is that, and I'll try, probably the easiest way to explain this is the day of the flood back in September. As I mentioned, I was out there. When I got out there, during the late morning, it had already quit raining. I think it was still sprinkling a little bit, but the bulk of the rain had already passed. And in fact, it had stopped raining probably an hour or so earlier. So it had stopped raining for quite a while. When I got there, the houses were already flooded, and I was there roughly 45 minutes to an hour before I left to go look at some other areas, but just during that time the creek continued to rise. What I'm trying to illustrate is that most of the water that comes down Timber Creek and that floods this neighborhood comes from properties upstream, and a lot of them, frankly, in Flower Mound. It takes a good hour to 2 hours, and maybe even more than 2 hours, for that peak runoff in Timber Creek to get to this location, to the point where these homes are going to flood. And of course, it's happened before. This obviously isn't the first time it's happened. On the flip side of that discussion, you've got this property that sits almost adjacent to the creek, and when it starts raining and you start getting runoff off of this property, that runoff is going to hit the creek probably within 10 to 20 minutes of when it first starts raining. So if you take that day back in September as an example, the highest amount of water coming down Timber Creek at Valley Parkway occurred a good hour to hour and a half after it stopped raining. By that time, the peak runoff from the property we're considering this evening had long gone downstream, and very little water was coming off this property when the peak runoff from upstream actually made it to this point. So my point being is that development of this property really would have no significant effect whatsoever to the type of event that happened back in September. One of the questions that people often ask, well, of course, our development ordinance does require stormwater detention in a lot of instances. And staff has some, staff can, I guess, choose or has a little bit of flexibility in when that detention is required based on the condition of the downstream drainage. In this particular case, it's conceivable that we could require anybody who developed on this property to install some sort of stormwater detention to keep the peak flow at the existing conditions, which is roughly 4 cubic feet of water per second, rather than 14. Unfortunately, what that does, and you have to be real careful with detention sometimes, is that although detention keeps that peak flow rate down, it also delays the peak runoff from a piece of property. So instead of the peak runoff leaving this property in 10 or 20 minutes, you might be delaying the peak runoff from this property to be coincident with the peak runoff of the creek. I'm not saying that would necessarily happen, but that's something that has to be considered whenever you're designing stormwater detention, and that's an exercise that the engineer would have to go through if we determined that we wanted him to consider detention. So detention is not always the answer. In fact, sometimes in a case like this, with a small piece of property that's immediately adjacent to a large creek, sometimes you're better off not having detention at that location, because having detention sometimes can actually exacerbate the condition. With regard to the topography, unfortunately, I didn't think to bring a contour map, although I am somewhat familiar with the property and have looked at it previously with regard to some of the other development ideas that have been floated in the past few years. Part of this property does flow back toward Corporate Drive. There's a little bit of a high point just to the north of Corporate Drive, and it sort of splits. The back part of the property falls back toward the creek. The very front part of the property does fall back toward Corporate. Some of it falls off to the side. It's sort of at the peak of a little knoll there. As it stands today, all of the water eventually will end up in Timber Creek. It just flows off the property in 3 or 4 different directions. That's not to say that if someone developed the property for a house or a church or whatever, that they may not regrade it and have it all fall in one direction or two. But as it stands today, it does drain in multiple directions. I'll be glad to answer any questions you have about the drainage or the traffic or the parking or access or anything of that nature that you might have.
Was any of this piece of property impacted by that flood?
No, this property was not impacted by the flood. It's relatively high. Now the property immediately behind it and then off to the east, a lot of that other ag open property surrounding it is in the floodplain and did have flood on it, but this particular property was not flooded.
What floodplain is along this creek, and are these houses situated within the limits of it?
The houses on the south side of Timber Creek Drive that back up to the creek are all located in the floodplain and in the floodway. You'll have to excuse me because I don't have as much history here as a lot of the folks in this room, but my understanding is that these homes were built at a time before this area was actually in the city of Louisville, and that it was annexed after the homes were built, and that that actually, with the exception of one house, all of them were built prior to any floodplain regulations. If this subdivision were being platted today under today's rules, none of these lots along the north side of Timber Creek, that are there now with houses on them would actually be allowed.
Do we have a revised floodplain map that would show whether these houses are in floodplains or not?
Yeah, we have our existing floodplain map that we're currently using, which was adopted in 2001, shows all of these homes to be within the floodplain and the floodway. We're getting ready to adopt a new floodplain map. I think it becomes effective on April 18th. And the floodplain, at least with regard to these properties along Timber Creek and Timber Creek Acres, is virtually the same.
Are these houses located on a low side or low bank of the creek?
Yes. These houses are actually on the low bank.
That would create flooding for them. To clarify something about relate the cubic foot to something the general public can live with, such as tanks on a toilet. I mean, that's the best one that I know.
Well, I'm trying to most everything now is in liters. I know that most toilets or even shower heads, they say 3 liters per minute or something like that. I guess I don't have that conversion factor sitting here in front of me, but a cubic foot of water, if my memory serves me correctly, a cubic foot of water is something in the neighborhood of, oh goodness, I can't remember the number of gallons now. Well, if I said a number, I would be pulling something out of the air. I don't have it.
I'll help you out on that, because I've had to do this several times before in presentations that I've done. But the present tank we have on the, what I call the economy tanks, carries 1.5 cubic feet of water. That's all it carries.
Okay.
And so we're talking about 10 toilet tanks of water is what we're talking about. And that's an insignificant amount compared to the 12,000 CFS coming down Timber Creek.
Well, and that's what I attempted to illustrate by the fact that we're comparing an increase of 10 cubic feet per second to a total flow of 12,200, even if the property were concreted from edge to edge.
Well, if it comes down to putting a detention pond in there, you can always put it in pipe underground.
Well, correct, and that could, the detention can be done that way as well, but then again, you have to go through that exercise of making sure that you're not going to exacerbate the issue by delaying the peak runoff from this property so that it's coincident with the peak runoff at the creek.
Exactly. The only thing you can do is throttle it.
Right.
Are there any other questions? No, I think we have a calculation.
You're going to say 7.5?
Okay, just just throwing some numbers out there. 10 cubic feet per second. If you want to make that per minute, that's 600 cubic feet in a minute. And in an hour, that's 36,000 cubic feet in an hour. That's actually a flow rate.
Not cubic feet.
Yeah.
Cubic feet. That's still in cubic feet, but obviously that makes it gallons. And then if you want to go into gallons, that's 62 gallons per second and 3,700 and some odd gallons over the course of a minute. So, but that's actually a flow rate, assuming that you've got that peak flow at a constant.
Okay. Any other questions? Thank you. I appreciate it. Thank you to staff for the explanation. Thank you for the citizens for coming forward and talking in reference to this. I'll go ahead and reiterate that this particular item, although we've talked about drainage and parking and the next sequential step in this specific request is a zone change request only, and I'll relay to the audience that our recommendation goes to City Council for the zone change, and it would be the next step when they would specifically deal with the parking and the runoff and that type of thing. So, let's see, we've closed the public hearing, and Chair will entertain a motion on item 6A.
Motion to recommend approval of item 6A.
Motion by Jim.
Second.
Seconded by Alvin. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. All those opposed? Motion carries as presented to recommendation to City Council. Item 6B of public hearing zoning, consideration of a zone change from single-family residential R-7.5 district zoning to office OD district zoning on the 0.274 acres located at the northwest corner of Bel Air Boulevard and Oakwood Lane, further identified as Track 9-2 of the E. Pickett Survey, Abstract 1014. The request is being made by William and Aaron Singleton, the property owners. Case number PZ-2011-03-04. Staff.
Good evening, Commissioners. The particular piece of property that we're looking at is this corner piece at the corner of Oakwood and Bel Air. As you can see, the rest of the street here, Oakwood, is developed. There are residential homes in that area. This particular piece of property, for some reason, was never platted. It is zoned R75. The owner of the property is asking this evening to rezone that property from single-family residential R75 to office district. If you can take a look over here, you've got what's now a vacant daycare across the street, some vacant local commercial property, shopping center over here, some multifamily, and another shopping strip down this way. That neighborhood is probably 30 years old or more. The applicant bought the property thinking that it was already zoned commercial. I guess the taxes, he was being taxed commercially. But when he came into the city, we did tell him that regardless of what what Denton County has it listed as, it is zoned single-family residential. We have had people over the years look at it, trying to see if they can build something on it, build a house. It's a little complicated because it's not your standard square or rectangular shaped lot. It is more pie-shaped. We did go through the process of talking with the applicant as to, if he were to zone it commercial, what would staff look at in terms of, local commercial, general business. In the end, we determined that office district, which is the most restrictive zoning category that the city has, would be probably the most favorable one to go in that area if it was to be rezoned commercially. Office district doesn't allow any type of retail or outside display, outside storage, so there's no concern about having a car lot or people like a little shopping center, people driving in and out all the time. It does allow for your typical office, doctors, dentists, accountant, churches are allowed anywhere, schools are allowed anywhere, but obviously based on that size, those aren't the types of uses that you would Seago in this lot. With Office District, you do have a minimum square foot of 1,000 square feet of building that is required. This lot does share, currently, there's an alley separating this residential lot and this vacant lot. If the property were to be rezoned to commercial or office district, they would not have access to that alley. They would have to provide their own entrance, ingress, and egress to the lot through their own driveway. In addition, if that lot is developed, a screening wall would be required to be placed between the commercial and the residential properties. We did speak with the applicant, Mr. Singleton, regarding, what would be required in terms of landscaping, parking, and we preliminarily looked at something maybe around anywhere from 1,000 to maybe 1,500 square feet, depending on how the site was developed, could be possible perhaps on this site. Mr. Singleton would like to rezone the property. He's not sure if he's going to actually develop the property or sell it to someone else to develop.
There's enough distance from the intersection for putting in an entrance?
I'm sorry, I can't hear you.
I'm sorry, there's enough distance from the intersection to put in an entrance?
I believe the city engineer looked at it, and they'd have to provide some kind of distance from the alley. They couldn't, put it directly adjacent to the alley, but somewhere probably midway there would be room to put an entrance.
Are there any other questions? What is the required height of the screening, if in fact we would?
6 foot.
6 foot.
Yes, sir.
Has the owner given any indication on building a one-story or two-story office building?
Both ideas have been discussed. There is restrictions when you are adjacent to residential as to how tall you can build, and that essentially is limited by what is allowed in that residential zoning district. With the R75, you are allowed to have 2.5 stories or 35 feet.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Great. Any other questions of staff? At this time, I'd like to open the public hearing for item number 6B. Anybody concerned, please come forward and state your name and address.
Hello, gentlemen. My name is Lynn Donnelly. I live at 1138 Pebblebrook. You can vaguely see that if you look at Oakwood. It's the street adjacent to that. Mm-hmm. I would urge you to consider the impact on the neighborhood. It's a very diverse neighborhood. My home has been in my family since the inception of the community there, and we choose to still live there. The traffic is exceedingly horrible there, especially when the daycare was open and is subject to reopen. Mm-hmm. I would see future costs to the city of possibly putting in a light there. And I am a teacher here in LASD. I know we're suffering budget cuts. I'm probably pretty sure that you're suffering budget cuts also. And to me, the only thing to change that to a commercial, the only people that would profit from it would be the owners of the property, and that the residents would suffer additional traffic. Actually, on the way here, on the way home today, I do turn down that street, and as you see South Shore in Oakwood, there's a stop sign which people choose to ignore daily. I almost got broadsided on the way home today, and my husband and I drove by just to see it on the way here, and there was a wreck on that corner. So I would ask that you, check with the police department, because there's wrecks there regularly, and school buses come in and out of there. It's a terribly congested area. People generally go in the middle of the median and stop and wait their turn to go. And any office built there that had people coming to it, such as a doctor's office, veterinarian office, dentist's office, would add additional traffic to our neighborhood, which is already congested. I live on Pebblebrook. I don't know if you're familiar with that street, but it is used as a bypass, or more of a runway, as you say. They never do go 25 miles an hour. I've seen some people going probably 60 miles an hour. My husband and myself, when our teenage daughter lived with us, her car was hit by someone speeding. It was totaled, knocked into a tree, and we lost $3,000 because the difference in what we owed on the car and what was paid on the car. And I just think that serves no purpose to all of the residents, which I said are diversified. Many of the residents walk to Kroger's as their only means of transportation. And it's a very, very heavily foot traffic, as well as vehicle traffic, as well as school bus traffic. And again, I would urge you to consider the effect on the entire neighborhood rather than the effect on one family. Thank you for listening.
Thank you, Lynn. Is there anyone else who would like to come forward to speak in reference to item 6B?
May I add something?
Sure. Yes.
Okay. Several of we've talked to people around us, and they feel the same way. And we are willing to petition the neighborhood that not pass, and that extra money not be spent by the city to put in a stoplight where it has not been considered before. So I'm not the lone voice, even though I'm the lone, well, my husband is with me, but there are other voices to be heard.
Right. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you. I'm William Singleton. I'm the owner of the property, and I am very appreciative of the concerns about traffic. That is the reason why, in meeting with Planning and Zoning, what was the name of the group that we met with? The Development Review Committee pointed out that while this is local commercial and this is local commercial, they didn't feel like adding another local commercial spot would be in the best interest of the neighborhood. But with the restrictions on office development, that might reflect I believe the phrase, the highest and best use to the property. One of the issues that we've run into with this property, it's been listed as Mary mentioned, it's listed on the county tax rolls as commercial. When I bought it, there was a commercial for sale sign on it. And the reason that it really needs to be commercial is every other house has an alleyway buffering it from Bel Air. If you'll notice that the square of the neighborhood encompasses, well, the square of the neighborhood does not encompass this particular piece of property. It doesn't have a buffering alley, which doesn't really make it suitable for residential. It's got roadways on every side of it, which doesn't make it really suitable for residential. So basically, we've got a piece of property that's just sitting here in the city, being taxed at commercial levels for years, but not being developed. What we propose is a very modest, simply the size of the lot demands that the building be very modest in size. Most likely, I can't predict the future, none of us can, but I don't think it's going to appeal to a medical practice, a high-volume sort of place, because you're not going to get more than about 1,200 square feet on it. Most likely, its appeal would be to, an accountant, something that would be low traffic. In addition, there is another means of access on that same street. If this is congested, if this is slow, there's always another exit or entrance down here. I'm not aware, is there a traffic light at this intersection?
Yes, there is.
There is? Okay, so there is controlled access here, which anytime there's a concern for safety, that's an option. It's just go right or go left instead of right instead of left. This would have an entrance midway, so people coming into the office would not be going through the neighborhood. They'd come in and leave through that same direction. And I believe that, and again, I really do respect the wishes of the neighborhood. I don't want to bring property values down by increasing traffic, but with what's destined to happen here already, the fact that you've got commercial all the way around here and an apartment complex here, that congestion is similar to the water runoff situation that we just considered. Adding a small office development here is not going to significantly alter all the traffic of people going to Kroger, people trying to get to and from I-35 and 121. It's a high-traffic area. I don't know if it's appropriate. Are there any questions for me, or am I done?
I have one. What would the traffic be like if they reopened that daycare across the street?
Typically, you're going to have, with a daycare, you're going to have peak times in the morning and at pickup time.
That's all I have.
Have you given any consideration as to, as we mentioned earlier, whether a one-story office building, a two-story office building?
When we looked at the parking possibilities to leave adequate parking, I believe the building is going to be limited to about 1,500 square feet. You could, and the footprint of the building, I think about 1,000 or 1,200 square feet was what the footprint of the building looked what it looked like it would be easy to do there. If you did two-story and had 2,000 square feet, you'd have to have how much parking? Is it one space per 200 square feet? Yeah, what we had laid out allowed for about 15 parking spots, which would, okay, so a max of about 15 parking spots. Okay. And that may not be answering the question about one-story or two-story. If it's two-story, it would be two-story on about 1,000 square foot footprint.
Have you, in that it's not conducive to the medical industry and some of the other industries, have you targeted or have any idea what kind of businesses you would target?
I'm a counselor in private practice, and initially what I had planned to do was to build there for myself and then sublease to maybe other folks similarly. I have, for some reason, an accountant's practice is what has come to mind for me frequently because they don't have a lot of traffic, don't need a lot of public space. With the economy doing what it's done, my plans to develop it got put on hold, and then as Mary mentioned, the fact that it's not zoned for office development created yet another barrier. So we're trying to get that squared away get the zoning to match what it, what I thought it was when I bought it and what it is on the county records, so that we have that option moving forward.
Thank you. Are there any other questions at all?
Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you.
Am I able to bring up another issue?
I'm sorry,
Am I able to bring up another issue?
Oh, certainly. This is a public hearing. If you'd like to.
Okay. Well, first of all, I know how many houses are in that subdivision. This particular road right here, let me see, right here is used as the roadway. The light has, like I said, numerous accidents there also. But that particular turn right there, I have an SUV. Now, getting my SUV, when there's a car right here, around that corner and staying in my lane is extremely difficult. It is a very narrow road in that section. I think it was designed back in the era when we didn't have SUVs, probably, and that wasn't a consideration. But as I think as residents that have been there, and I certainly feel for Mr. Singleton and would hope that he could recoup his taxes, but I don't think that I should be dictated which way I come in and out of my neighborhood and told to go down to the light if I want to, get out of my neighborhood, especially emergency entrances by fire department, police. I'm sure you're aware high crime rate that's been in that area lately. I just would hope that before you would prove it or send it further that you might investigate trying to maneuver a car around that tight space and coming in contact with cars coming and going from a business. Thank you.
Thank you. Is there anyone else from the public that would like to comment on this item, item 6B? Do we have a motion to close the public hearing?
Motion to close public hearing.
Motion by Jim.
Second.
Seconded by TJ. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed? Public hearing is closed on item 6B. Is there any other discussion from the commissioners on this item? I sympathize with the citizens and the people in this residential area. It's very hard to, in my opinion, I believe we've been faced with this before, to try to integrate an office space or any kind of commercial space with a single-family area. And I think we can all agree that even a 6-foot fence can still be, if it's a 2-story building, your privacy in a neighborhood area is all but gone. On the other hand, we've got a piece of land that hasn't been used in years, and there's no one to develop it. So our recommendation will only go forward to the City Council for approval. That's a comment I have. If there are no other comments from the commissioners, I'll ask for a motion on item 6B.
Motion to recommend approval, item 6B.
Motion to recommend approval by Jim. Is there a second?
Second.
Second by Alvin. All those in favor, please say aye.
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 All those opposed? Opposed. The motion still carries by 4-1 to move forward to the City Council as a recommendation. Okay, item number 7 are reports. The Transportation Board will be meeting immediately following Planning and Zoning, and we'll go ahead. Do I have a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Second.
Motion by Bill and seconded by TJ. All those in favor? Please say aye. Aye. Meeting is adjourned.